Hello and welcome back to another Dare to Game video. Today we are discussing the recent release Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 and what its success means in the bigger picture of gaming. Before we go too far, I'll quickly ask that you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We're so close to hitting that 100k milestone that I can almost taste it, and y'all have the power to push me over that hump, so please do so. But with that out of the way, what are we talking about? So for those of you who are unaware, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is the direct sequel to 2018's Kingdom Come Deliverance, a realistic open-world action RPG set in medieval Bohemia, starring the village lad, Henry. Henry is a peasant nobody at the beginning of the game, and depending how you play the game, he may end it as little more. The game came from very humble beginnings, even needing a Kickstarter campaign to prove interest and get the funding wheels rolling. It was, for all intents and purposes, an indie game from a brand new studio. And if not for another small release in 2018 that you may have heard of, Red Dead Redemption 2, it likely would have been most people's top contender for Game of the Year. Now this is, of course, glossing over a lot of controversy and some other details that affected this, but for the moment, those aren't crazy important. Suffice it to say, KCD was a game that defied most people's expectations and proved the studio to be capable of competition at the highest level. Fast forward to April of 2024 and Warhorse Studios announced the long-anticipated sequel to Kingdom Come Deliverance, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, a direct sequel that picks up exactly where the first game left off. The promise was simple. Within the year, they'd be releasing it, and it would be roughly the same experience as the first game, but bigger, better, and more well-polished. This should not sound crazy, as that is essentially what a sequel needs to be. This is what makes it so difficult for sequels to nail it. For every Shrek 2, you have a dozen direct-to-DVD Disney sequels that define the issue. So for fans of the burgeoning franchise, expectations would immediately be set high. I, for one, having played well over 1,000 hours of the first game, was hyped immediately. Here comes a sequel to one of my top 3 games of all time, and it's coming soon. So that's the first lesson that Warhorse Studios taught the gaming world with KCD2, when to announce your title. Now to be clear, I was not surprised by this announcement. No, I did not have any inside information. No special media access, nothing like that. In fact, my being left in the dark, despite being relatively prominent in the KCD community, actually defined my early relationship with this sequel. But still, the announcement did not surprise me. Warhorse Studios had released their first game in 2018. It left off on a cliffhanger ending, and despite all odds, was wildly successful with a dedicated core following. And it is also the only IP that Warhorse Studios has, or at least the only tried and tested one. So you have a studio who released their first game 6 years ago and only has one IP, and it's a very profitable and successful one. Of course they were working on a sequel. Only an idiot would not be in their position. But they still kept it under wraps. Why? It's not because it was easy, let me tell you that. The production team grew dramatically, and this time they had a large built-in following. So it's not like it would be easy to keep this all a secret. It's also not the industry standard. For over a decade now, game studios have been announcing their games earlier and earlier, weaponizing the gaming hype cycle. Oftentimes, announcing games well before they ever enter production. This is a tactic that I've heavily criticized in the past, including when I addressed the issue of a KCD sequel all the way back in 2019. At the time, I pointed out how a sequel could realistically appear anytime in the next couple of years. After all, The Witcher 3, another one of my favorite games of all time, was only in development for about 3.5 years. So as I said then, no, it does not take 10 years or even 6 years to make a good open-world RPG. CD Projekt Red, who were much smaller as a dev studio back then, made one of the biggest and best of all time in under 4 years. But again, Warhorse Studios handled these issues pretty much perfectly. They supported their first release with bug fixes, patches, free updates, and 4 paid DLCs that were, in my opinion, worth the money, and provided the company with additional income during the ever-important post-release window where you need employees working on patches and fixes and early pre-production on the next title, but you're still years out from the release window of your next game. After finishing these DLCs and the support for them, Warhorse knuckled down on the sequel. They didn't announce it, they wouldn't tell anyone what they were doing. They just shut their mouths and worked on it. it. And I know this is a challenge. So many people get into game development because they want to be heard, but the extreme that this is taken to has gotten absurd. So many people get addicted to hearing their own voice or seeing their words in quotes that they simply can't help themselves. They give press interviews, they go on podcasts, they spend all day on Twitter, pretty much everything and anything other than working on their game. And this is not unique to game development. I'm sure you can probably think of an author or even a YouTuber who does the same thing. It's a horrible, self-destructive habit, and it is so easy to fall into. But Warhorse Studios charged ahead, and got their game underway and worked on it silently for years. And then, only when the game was well within view, the final product approaching ever closer day after day, did they finally announce it. And to their credit, their first announcement of the game was well under a year before the final release date. And that is pretty much perfect. This gave them more than enough time to finish the game, market it, and get the hype pretty much maxed out in time for release. Yes, their original announcement was that it would be out before the end of 2024, and they did delay the game, in a way, setting an official release date of February 2025. But I won't deduct full points for this delay, because then they moved up the release date once they were positive that the game was ready, or to avoid a crowded release week, depending who you ask. But either way, they did it. They released the game in an acceptable amount of time after they announced it. So right about now you may be realizing that you've been watching this video for a while, and I still haven't really said much about Bethesda, despite the fact that they are likely prominently featured in the title and thumbnail of this video. Well, even though I haven't called them out by name, I would hope that a lot of the stuff that I've said thus far has rung a few bells, and the comparison isn't too hard for you to draw. So far, I've praised Warhorse Studios for the fact that they delivered a satisfying sequel experience, shut their mouths and actually worked on their game, and actually released it within an acceptable window of their original announcement. We've talked about how long it takes to make games. Not in depth, which we'll get to next, but we touched on it briefly. And we've also talked about the responsibility of the game studio to make games. I know that this might sound abusive to some people, but when did it become controversial to expect a person to deliver a product if that is how they make their living? We see this topic all the time with the author of a certain high-profile fantasy series, who has seemingly decided not to finish his long-running series and is now just waiting out the clock until his death to try and escape the trap that he's written himself into. When criticized, there are always those who jump to his defense, saying he doesn't owe us anything. Then, when it comes to gaming, there are always the apologist bots who will say, "Oh, I'd rather wait for a good release than rush them into releasing a bad game." Here's the thing, pal, it does not need to be one or the other. And here's where we trot out the classic game development timeline data. So as we've already said, The Witcher 3 was in development for just 3.5 years before being released. Skyrim was quote-unquote in development for roughly 6 years, although many sources have reported the actual full development, not including pre-production and conceptualization, was little more than 3 years long. Red Dead Redemption's full development time from concept to release was 5 years. The sequel, Red Dead 2, lengthened that a bit to 8 years, with much of those early years devoted to small team development and of course the writing process. So the actual hard game development is debatable, but most sources show that production and testing phase to only have taken place between 2016 to 2018, adding the pre-production and planning phase of 2014 to 2016, and we have a much more realistic development time of roughly 4 years. Kingdom Come Deliverance, at least the first game, is tricky, because they had essentially no resources and a super tiny team, so it's hard to track. But I've seen some estimates claiming 2009 was the earliest conceptual stage for the first game. But the Kickstarter campaign launched in 2014, and the game released in February of 2018. So even if we figure in a hard development time of a full year prior to the crowdfunding effort, that still puts the total development time at about 5 years tops. Then, as we know, the sequel didn't start development until at least a year after KCD's release, as the team was dedicated to the DLCs and post-launch support. So if we figure development started in 2019, that means the second game was in development for roughly 4 to 5 years. That sounds pretty scattered, and remember, we should consider things like development teams and resources, but to keep things simple, I'll average it out for you, since we have enough data points for a sloppy average. And that average, taking our high-end development estimates into account, is a measly 4 years of actual game development to release a game. So that's how long it realistically takes a development team to make a game. And every example I used are some of the largest and most detailed modern open-world games to be created in the last 2 decades. Does Bethesda follow this rule? Spoiler alert, the answer can be complicated however you want, and the answer is still no. Skyrim released in 2011, so The Elder Scrolls 6 should have released around 2015, correct? Well, no, because The Elder Scrolls isn't their only IP. They also have Fallout, and Fallout 4 came out in 2015. So hey, that's right on the money. If you assume that the core team switched production a year or so after the release of Skyrim, a 2015 release for Fallout 4 is just about right. So that means 2019 should have been when The Elder Scrolls 6 released. Well, hold on there, buckaroo, not so fast. Because Bethesda had bigger fish to fry, namely Fallout 76, which released in 2018. You might remember that year for releases like KCD, Red Dead 2, or God of War. It was Bethesda's shameless and soulless cash grab, which was rushed to release, to an overwhelming groan of disappointment from their audience. So they wanted a live service game to milk. Who doesn't? But here's the problem. Instead of working on the game that their audience wanted, that being Elder Scrolls 6, they used their less popular franchise for a cash grab attempt that failed miserably. So that means that if they got their heads on straight and got to work, they should have had The Elder Scrolls 6 out by 2022, maybe 2023 at the latest. But guess what? They didn't. Instead, they released a little game called Starfield in September of 2023. You might remember this as the game that everybody wanted to love. I know, because I was one of them. I wanted to love Starfield. I gave it the benefit of every single doubt. I wanted so much to love that game as much as I loved Oblivion, or Skyrim, or Fallout 3, or even, to a certain extent, Fallout 4. But after the glitter faded, I did not love it at all. In fact, I kind of hated it. It was so empty, soulless, and most importantly, pointless. The game was something that their fans didn't ask for. It came at the expense of the games that they did ask for. And if all of that wasn't enough, it sucked. Starfield is the blandest game I've played for a very long time. It's so bad that even Bethesda's famous modding community has not been able to save it. So Bethesda does two things here. They follow the rule of development for large open world games. Clearly, it takes them approximately 4 years to make one of their flagship titles. However, they act with complete disregard, if not disdain, for their fanbase. They don't care that we want Elder Scrolls. They want to work on Space Skyrim instead. They don't care that we like handcrafted deep stories and hidden Easter eggs, and carefully designed worlds. They want to give us procedurally generated slop instead. They don't respect their consumers. They announced The Elder Scrolls 6 in 2019, with absolutely no intention of actually working on the game. They just wanted to use that IP that people actually care about to artificially drive interest in their crappy space game that nobody wanted. If we follow the pattern they have set, the earliest we can expect The Elder Scrolls 6 is fall of 2027, with a more realistic date of 2028. A full 17 years after the release of their last title in the franchise, and nearly a decade after the initial announcement of the game. And now for those people still watching, some of you might be wondering why I've spent so much time talking about the release cycle of games and not about the respective quality of the games in question. Well, that's actually fairly simple. If a game doesn't release, that's the worst possible game. If you can't get your hands on it and play it, it's worse than Veilguard, because at least, if you for some reason wanted to, you can purchase Veilguard and play it. When The Elder Scrolls 6 releases in 2028, the high schoolers who played it in 2011 will be in their mid to late 30s, so the lesson must be, the game isn't for us. Bethesda has decided to cater to the gaming world in general, instead of to their actual audience. And how does that compare to Warhorse Studios? Fairly favorably, I should say. Setting aside a content controversy that many fans of the original game were less than impressed with, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 was made for the actual audience of the first game, not some hypothetical audience that they hoped existed. The game has roughly the same design, style, and overall direction, while attempting to improve upon what already existed. I personally think they overdid it on the combat, making it a bit too easy, but it's still very fun, and just makes me long for hardcore mode that much more. The game is a handcrafted work of art. Every side quest is meaningful and and unique. Every quest line is well thought out, many with multiple branching paths to completion, and sometimes unforeseen consequences. The game offers tremendous freedom in the area of player choice and role-playing, while still delivering a tight, cohesive, and compelling narrative, which is crucial to a story-driven RPG. Warhorse Studios made the game their audience asked for. They did it in silence without getting addicted to the sound of their own voices. They didn't fall into the live games as a service trap. They didn't announce their game years before release only to delay it multiple times. They didn't use AI or procedural generation as a shortcut to make their game as wide as an ocean but as deep as a puddle. They didn't coast off the success of their previous title for decades, always promising but never delivering anymore. They delivered the product on time and exceeded most people's expectations. And that is what Bethesda needs to learn from KCD2. They need to learn that they are a business, that they have a product, and that product needs to be produced in a timely manner, and it needs to be what their consumers want, not what they want their consumers to want. They need to learn that a large open-world RPG can be made in a couple of years. It can have a huge, detailed map, a long, captivating story, and a metric shitload of handcrafted, painstakingly detailed content inside of it. They need to learn to get off of Twitter, get off the stage, and get behind their desks where they belong. We all have jobs to do. We don't excuse doctors for malpractice. We don't excuse chefs for undercooking our chicken. We don't excuse package carriers for leaving our Amazon package in the street, and we don't excuse farmers for not producing the food that we eat every day to survive. Stop making excuses for authors, developers, and producers. They're good enough at doing that themselves. Thanks for watching another Dare to Game video. If you like this video, please leave a like and a comment. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. If you like my content and would like to support this channel, consider becoming a member today for as little as $1.99 a month. It makes a huge difference. But in any case, thanks for watching and have a nice day. I'll see you next time.